Good evening. Welcome everyone to this live, fully active webinar. Today is February 11th, 2021, and this is Dissent, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, The Rule of Law, Compromise in an Age of Polarization. This event is hosted by the Monroe County Bar Association, the Levine Center to End Hate at the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester, and the Konar Center for Tolerance and Jewish Studies at Nazareth College. For those on this webinar who are receiving CLE credit, to comply with accreditation regulations, please fill out your affirmation form and evaluation sheet at the end of the program and email back to Danielle Matias. In exchange, you will receive your certification of attendance after the program via email. All attorneys must attend programs in their entirety to receive credit. According to the New York State Continuing Legal Education Board, CLE providers are prohibited from issuing partial credit. I'm Hava Leipzig-Holzauer. I'm the Executive Director of the Konar Center for Tolerance and Jewish Studies at Nazareth College, and I would like to thank my partners in planning tonight's webinar, Kevin Ryan, Executive Director of the Monroe County Bar Association, Jill Paperno, First Assistant Public Defender and President of the Monroe County Bar Association, Karen Elam, Director of the Levine Center to End Hate and of Community Relations at the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester, and Attorney Jeffrey Wicks, who will be co-moderating the question and answer period with me later in the program. Everyone's line has been muted for the presentation. As a reminder, please submit questions and comments through the chat function at the bottom of your screens, both tech-related and for the panelists. We will first hear presentations from the panelists and respond to your questions later in the program. The program is being recorded, and the video viewing code for this CLE is 0000. For 15 minutes prior to the start of our program, there was a slideshow running which included bios of our panelists and moderators. A foundational principle in planning this program has been to engage in civil discourse, to bring in multiple different voices and perspectives from a variety of sectors of the community. You will hear from Rabbi Debbi Till, Senior Rabbi at Temple Sinai, Justice Stephen Lindley, Appellate Division of the New York Supreme Court, and Mr. Olajiwon McCadney, Assistant Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Educational Achievement, as well as NCAA Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Nazareth College. So I would like to first welcome Rabbi Debbi Till.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the Konar Center, the Levine Center to End Hate from the Jewish Federation, and to the Monroe County Bar Association for this important opportunity for dialogue and debate with all of you, and to share this time with my distinguished panelists, with Justice Lindley and with Olajiwon McCadney. I'm so pleased to be here with all of you. I was asked to speak about Ruth Bader Ginsburg in brief, the Jewish practice of debate, the place of dissent within our tradition, and wisdom about compromise and conflict resolution. It's a lofty challenge in 15 to 20 minutes, but I will endeavor. So I will screen share some with you, and we'll hope to do some learning together. I share with you now just some brief background information about Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Much of it is probably known to you, but I share it again. She was born in Brooklyn in 1933, receiving her bachelor's from Cornell University, having attended both Columbia and Harvard Law School, and receiving ultimately her law degree from Columbia. And graduating, I am told, I have read, tying first in her class. She served as a law clerk in the District Court for the Southern District of New York from 1959 to 1961. And then from 1961 to 1963, she was a research associate and then Associate Director of the Columbia Law School Project on International Procedure. A professor also at Rutgers University Law School and Columbia, and a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford from 1977 to 78. In 1971, she co-founded the Women's Rights Project at the American Civil Liberties Union and served as the ACLU's general counsel and on the National Board of Directors from 1974 to 1980. Also, to her credit, her list is long and there aren't enough hours for us to cover it all. She served on the board and executive committee of the American Bar Foundation and the board of editors of the American Bar Association, and also on the Council of the American Law Institute. She was appointed a judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia in 1980, and then President Clinton nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and she took her seat in 1993. We all know, sadly, just at the beginning of our High Holy Days last year in 2020, Justice Ginsburg passed away. She was the first Jewish woman to serve on the US Supreme Court. We are told that she was the only justice with a mezuzah affixed to her office doorpost. And on her walls, she had a picture, a photo that said, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, the Hebrew injunction from the Torah meaning justice, justice shall you pursue, a central teaching for us, most assuredly. She was not known for her ritual observance, despite being raised in an observant Jewish home. She actually spoke frequently about how the Jewish values that she was exposed to as a child inspired her, and she was active in Jewish causes and within the Jewish community, saying that she was a judge born and raised and proud of being a Jew, and that the demand for justice runs through the entirety of the Jewish tradition. She hopes in her years on the bench of the Supreme Court that she will have the strength and courage to remain constant in the service of that demand. We say that she was raised with Judaism, observant for a time, and then apparently, we are told, had a departure around the age of 17 when her mother passed away, and she was unable to be counted in the prayer quorum that is required to say the mourner's Kaddish. And this, for her, left a sour taste in her mouth around inequity, and there are those who believe that though she remained part of the Jewish community, she had to carve, not surprisingly, a new path for herself to find her place as a progressive woman. And many who believe that that seminal moment when her mother passed away led her to, in fact, start. It was really a kind of foreshadowing of her decades of work and tireless fight for equality. How did she fulfill that hope of what she aspired to do? In the saying that was on the earlier slide, the demand for justice runs through the entirety of the Jewish tradition. I hope in my years on the bench of the Supreme Court in the United States, I will have the strength and courage to remain constant in the service of that demand. So the question is, how did she do that as one of 9 women in a class of 500 at Harvard? She was so set on refusing to conform to gender stereotypes and discrimination. She persisted, we know, and brought out into daylight the iniquities and injustices she witnessed, and insisted, both as a student and then later as a teacher, and certainly as an attorney and as a Supreme Court Justice, on the equal treatment, really continuing to set the stage of equal treatment for all in her unparalleled work, becoming the second female law professor at Rutgers, where she fought fiercely for equal pay and succeeded, co-founding the first law journal, not succeeded overall, but succeeded in large measure at that time. She co-founded the first law journal on women's rights, becoming the first tenured female law professor at Columbia, noteworthy for so many reasons. There are many gathered here this evening who are more learned and more skilled than I to speak to the impact of her work and to the function of so much of her critical work, which was around the work on dissenting, on writing dissents. She argued cases before the Supreme Court. We know that there were at least 6, and I believe she won 5. For me, very much concerned with the separation of religion and state. She had removed the words "in the year of our Lord" from the Supreme Court bar certificates. As somebody who was raised Jewish, who had an attachment and a love for Judaism, despite teenage and young adult years, and somewhat threaded throughout, she was fierce in her work to separate out religion and state. And she was known so well for her strongly worded dissents in response to some of the Supreme Court opinions, at times reading them aloud from the bench, at times utilizing language which we are told broke with legal tradition and which called for Congress to change what in her understanding were laws that were unfair and unjust. The power and the impact of her dissents ought not to be underestimated. Her insistence of rigorous examination of facts, legal precedent, and process, twinned with her powerfully worded and delivered dissents, educated and sought not only to change opinions, but to change existing laws. And in the late Justice words, she said, "Dissents speak to a future age. It is not simply to say, my colleagues are wrong, and I would do it this way, but the greatest dissents do become court opinions, and gradually over time, their views become the dominant view. So that's the dissenters' hope, that they are writing not for today, but for tomorrow." Writing for the nation, she aspired for us to become, and guided by her service to demand, really for us to become the nation that she thought we could eventually evolve into being. Those words, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue, which come to us from the book of Deuteronomy, is central to much of our study, ancient and modern, our worship, and our day-to-day work in Tikkun Olam, in the repairing of the broken in our world. How we understand that pursuit, how we understand our 4,000-year-old teachings, shapes, guides, and at times confounds us. Thousands of years of scholars and students have spent countless hours poring over our sacred texts to understand them and to live in harmony with one another and with God. Study and debate, at times heated and contentious debate, begun with our ancestors as far back as the Bible and continues today. Judaism is a religion that values wrestling with our text, vigorous study, and differences of opinion. Diversity of thought and opinion are deeply respected. And as the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs noted, argument and the hearing of contrary views is of the essence of the religious life. Moses argues with God. That is one of the most striking things about him. He argues with God on their first encounter at the burning bush, and then 4 times he resists God's call to lead the Israelites to freedom until God finally gets angry with him. The first to argue with God is actually Abraham, who said on hearing God's plan to destroy the cities of the plain, "Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice?" The understanding was that not only some argued with God, but that God expected them to do so. In the book of Numbers, you may remember the graphic and violent story of Korah and his followers who led what was deemed an illegitimate rebellion against the leadership of Moses and Aaron in the desert. And God punishes them, we are told, in either a fiery consumption or the earth opens and swallows them up. And here we see up close a case of dissent gone wrong. Rabbi Gary Zola, professor of Jewish history at the Hebrew Union College, reminds us that bitter partisanship and political infighting that typify the contemporary political scene are in fact as old as the Bible itself, and we see this in the story of Korah. Later in that same book, in the book of Numbers, we read the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. After Zelophehad died, leaving no sons, his 5 daughters, Mala, Noah, Hoglah, and Milcah, and Tirzah, went before Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the Jewish people and advocated for their rights to inherit the land that their father had left behind, but there were no sons, and so they wanted their due. Based on the logic of their argument and the need really for self-subsistence, God instructed Moses to grant the daughters their land and set the precedence that hence women ought to inherit their father's property if there were no other heirs, no direct kin, and how we see here that dissent can not only work, but change law. painted with the broadest of brushstrokes. Korach incited violence and started a rebellion. Not enough time and too much could be said about his particular story and the correlation to our times, but the daughters of Zelophehad organized, presented a compelling argument, and debated to advocate for the land. And this was for themselves and for future generations. Two radically different outcomes, violent versus non-violent conflict. From the earliest of our texts through today, we have recorded diversity of thought, minority and dissenting opinions, and we learn just as much from the outcome and of those discussions as we do the manner in which they are held. We go now to the 9th of Adar. We are approaching that month right now, the Hebrew month of Adar. And what is noteworthy, what is noteworthy, I will just go back one slide, about the 9th of Adar. Let me just get back to the right slide. Okay, the 9th of Adar is in fact, oh, I think I am stuck. Hold on one second. Just go back one. Okay, in any case, I will, here we go. The 9th of Adar comes to us as we approach the beginning of this Hebrew month, and we look at an episode that took place during this month 2,000 years ago, when healthy disagreements, what were healthy disagreements called L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, between two competing houses of study called Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, turned destructive and deadly. What began with debates regarding matters such as how to eat certain foods, how to observe certain holidays, who can marry whom, and who can be allowed into certain houses of study, really descended into unrestrained anger, hatred, and violence, and deadly battle between the two, ultimately to determine who was right. And we commemorate the 9th of Adar each year by committing to nonviolent conflict and to constructive conflict. I think perhaps my slides are stuck. I will try one more time. I know that time is of the essence. There we go. In Jewish tradition, we have something called machloket l'shem shamayim, constructive conflict, disagreements for the sake of heaven. It includes arguing the issues while respecting and maintaining good relationships with the other side, making sure that one's personal motivation is to come to a best solution, not just to win, and at times admitting to being wrong and acknowledging that sometimes both sides might be right. We know that these are some of our learnings from the Academy of Shammai and the Academy of Hillel. One group asserted that the laws follow our views, and the other asserted the laws follow our views, and a heavenly voice came down and announced they are both the words of the living God, but the law follows the Academy of Hillel. And since both were the words of the living God, what entitled the Academy of Hillel to have the law agree with them? Because they were kind and modest, they studied their own rulings and those of the Academy of Shammai. And not only that, they mentioned the rulings of the Academy of Shammai before their own. A critical point in how we go through machloket. What does machloket mean? Does it mean to divide from the verb to divide, or does it mean to distinguish, to make a separation or a distinction? And this is the question with which we are left. Jewish law and the law of the land in which we live govern us, but Judaism has always valued and continues to value study, debate, and diversity of thought. The recognition of dissenting opinions and the framework within which to have those discussions can assist us during these highly stressful and polarized times. We are taught that when two ships in a narrow channel or two laden camels on a mountain pass, a court might find reasons that one or the other should move, but ultimately if neither ship nor camel has to give way, then neither can move without compromise. And if both try to move, both insist they have the right, they are right, then both might sink, or both might fall from the mountain. And we are encouraged to think about how making space for one another, even when we know or think we are right, is beneficial. Where possible, the value and act of compromise plays a significant role in our day-to-day. I am privileged to serve at Temple Sinai and within the broader Rochester community, where we enjoy a strong and diverse intra and interfaith fabric, whether for reasons of observance or understanding of our own traditions. There are times when we cannot and will not agree. Some are fundamental to who we are respectively and to where we are and how we are religiously, and how we navigate those moments can be difficult. How we reach compromise might look different depending on where we stand, but what I think guides many of us is some versions of the teachings of our sages, Hillel and Shammai, who by way of their tragedies taught us that we can. And I will show you this screen because it is worth seeing and remembering. Skip over this part. This is for us a page of Talmud to look at, but I see the hour is running long, so I share these slides with you. From the houses of Hillel and Shammai, that we are taught from where they're up until the terrible fight that led to their destruction and to the houses of each of their academies' destruction and far too much death on both sides. They had enjoyed a respectful discourse and debate. And from the outcome of that tragic day, that 9th of Adar, when we rebuilt, when we turned back to the wisdom of the houses of Hillel and Shammai, what we are left with, among many other of their teaching, is that we ought to debate the issues without attacking people and damaging relationships, that we need to check our motivation to ensure that it is more than winning that we are after, and that we have a goal of attempting to solve problems. We must be willing to each listen to one another and be open to admitting we are wrong when that is the case. And perhaps most challenging, that both Hillel and Shammai and their respective students spoke the words of the living God. We both might be right despite holding various opinions. So I will head to my conclusion in order to give my other panelists their time. I just need 2 more minutes. When we talk about Elu ve'elu, that these are the words of the living God, we know that compromise is what is ultimately important. And the word for compromise in Hebrew is pishara, which means it comes from Mayan potrim, which means warm water. It's a beautiful image with which to finish. Warm water is a compromise. The hot water can say, well, actually, this warm water is hot. It's just been cooled down a bit. And the cold water can say it's cold. It's just been warmed up a bit. And the essence of compromise is that both sides can emerge, claiming a kind of victory. Every time we walk into a room, every time we see a mezuzah hanging on the door, we are reminded of compromise. One said Hillel and Shammai had a debate. One said it should be vertical. One said it should be horizontal. And the compromise is that for those of us who hang a mezuzah, we strike a compromise, and our mezuzah is at an angle. And each time we see that mezuzah, we are reminded of the importance of compromise. And last, as we consider the roles of diverse opinions, of minority opinions, we note that when we recite the words in prayer, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, at the end of the Kaddish, we take 3 steps back. This is our prayer for peace, and we recognize that sometimes we need to uproot ourselves from our previously held positions of conviction in order to make some concessions so that we can move many hundreds of steps forward. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice shall we pursue is more than an aphorism. It is a way of life, a call, the way we understand we are intended to live, and the wisdom of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who teaches us that Judaism is unequivocal in teaching that the pursuit of truth and justice require the freedom to debate and to disagree.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Till, for jam-packed Torah wisdom that I'm definitely going to have to personally unpack again after this program, but we really thank you. So now I'd like to welcome our next panelist, which is Justice Stephen Lindley.
Thank you, Hava. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's my great honor to have been asked to say a few words this evening about the rule of law. On April 28th, 1836, a free black man by the name of Francis McIntosh was lynched in St. Louis, Missouri. McIntosh was 26 years old at the time, and he worked on a steamboat that was docked in the port of St. Louis. Mr. McIntosh that day had made plans to visit a lady friend of his who worked on another boat that was docked in St. Louis. When he got off his boat en route to his rendezvous, McIntosh encountered two police officers who were chasing another man. The officers asked McIntosh for his assistance in apprehending the suspect, but McIntosh declined. He had other plans for that afternoon. When the suspect got away, the officers arrested McIntosh instead, charging him with breach of the peace. On the way to jail, McIntosh asked how much time he was looking at for this particular offense. When one of the officers said 5 years, McIntosh pulled out a knife he was carrying and stabbed both officers, killing one on the spot and seriously wounding the other. McIntosh was quickly apprehended and taken to jail. In the meantime, a group of people had gathered around the stricken officers, and word had spread about what had happened. A mob of angry white men formed, and they had no patience for the rule of law. They did not wish to wait for the court system to deal with Mr. McIntosh pursuant to the rule of law. So instead, they proceeded to the jail, dragged McIntosh out of his cell, and took him to the edge of town where they tied him to a tree and set him on fire. Mr. McIntosh begged, as he was roasting to death, he begged to be shot. But the mob wanted him to suffer, and so he did. He slowly burned to death. Now, the lynching of a black man in America at this time in history was not terribly uncommon. And a lot of the blacks who were lynched had committed no crimes, unless you consider it unlawful for a black man to talk to a white woman without having been spoken to. So the lynching of McIntosh, who after all had committed capital murder, understandably did not create a stir in most quarters. But it did catch the eye of a 28-year-old lawyer from Springfield, Illinois, by the name of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was concerned for the future of our government. He was concerned that self-representation may not last. He had seen instances of vigilantism, of blatant disregard for the rule of law all across the country, not just in St. Louis. There was an incident in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where 5 gamblers, white men, were hanged by a mob, all in the name of moral virtue. And at the time, I point out, in Mississippi, it was perfectly legal to gamble. There was another incident where an anti-slavery editor in Illinois was shot to death, and his printing presses were thrown into a river. All of this caused great concern to Lincoln for the future of our republic. In January of 1838, this young lawyer who was in his second term in the state legislature gave an address at the Young Men's Lyceum Club in Springfield. It became his first well-known address, his well-known speech. And in the Lyceum address, which we've all heard about in history, I've heard about it, but I didn't really read the entire speech until recently, in light of recent events. And what he said there was he was worried. Our country at that point was only roughly 50 years old. And it was not a given that we were going to continue, that it could survive. And his concern was that he was worried about the dire threat posed by what he called the mobocratic spirit. The mobocratic spirit is what he called it, or mob law. people taking the law into their own hands. And he was worried that if people did not feel secure in their persons or their property, they would lose confidence in the government. And they might look to another form of government, a strongman, if you will, a king, who could provide law and order. So Lincoln was greatly worried with respect to the rule of law. And the speech, the Lyceum address is, I believe, part of your handout, and I encourage you all to read it. I don't have time enough in my 20 minutes to go through the entire speech, but I will we'll give a few quotes. He said, when men take it into their heads today to hang gamblers or to burn murderers, they should recollect that in confusion usually attending to such matters, they will be as likely to hang or burn somebody who is neither a gambler nor a murderer as one who is. And that acting upon the example they set, the mob of tomorrow may and probably will hang or burn some of them on the very same mistake. He also said that if the laws are to be continuously despised and disregarded, if the people's rights to be secure in their persons and properties are held to be in no better tenure than the caprice of a mob, the alienation of their affections from the government is a natural consequence. And to that, sooner or later, it must come. Now, we've come a long way since the 1830s, when slavery was legal in the South and women and blacks could not vote. But Lincoln's message from the Lyceum address is highly relevant today. Ladies and gentlemen, the rule of law is under attack in our country from both the right and the left. We all saw what happened on January 6th in our nation's capital. President Trump gave a speech to a large group of his supporters, thousands of people who he had summoned. And he repeated his false and frankly ridiculous claims that the election had been stolen from him. During the 70-minute speech, Trump urged his supporters to, quote, fight like hell, saying if they didn't fight like hell, they weren't going to have a country left. He told them to march with him down to the Capitol building, where Congress was voting on whether to certify the election results. Now, of course, Trump did not march down to the Capitol building. He went home to watch TV, where he spent, that's how he spends most of his time, apparently. But unfortunately, the mob did not go home and watch TV. And the result was the most serious threat to our government in the history of our republic. We saw this week with the impeachment hearings how very close the violent invaders of the Capitol were to getting their hands on Vice President Trump, who refused, Vice President Pence, who refused President Trump's unlawful request to disregard the rule of law. They came very close to getting their hands on Nancy Pelosi and others. Now, this all, of course, was in blatant disregard for the rule of law. In the court system, what we do is we are involved in the nonviolent resolution of disputes. If somebody does you wrong, they steal your car, they cause you physical injury, you don't take the matters into your own hand. The police make an arrest, and the court system will impose punishment if the person is proved guilty. If you have a business dispute with somebody or your neighbors or what have you, you don't fight it out, you don't shoot it out. You come to the court system. That's what we do. And Trump's claims of election fraud were heard in the courts of law all across our country. 62 election lawsuits were filed on or behalf of Donald Trump in various of the swing states, and Trump lost 61 of those lawsuits. The only case he won was in Pennsylvania, where a court ruled that approximately 8,500 mail-in ballots should not be counted because they arrived too late and there was issues with respect to those ballots. But Biden won Pennsylvania without those ballots by more than 80,000 votes, which is almost twice the amount of votes that Trump carried Pennsylvania in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. Now, it shouldn't matter, but I will point out that many of the judges who ruled against Trump in these lawsuits were Republicans, some of whom had been appointed by Trump to federal court. And every single judge that considered the merits of Trump's claims found not a scintilla of evidence that the results were affected by fraud in any of these states. People were worried. I had friends who were worried about Trump had put Amy Coney Barrett on and other Supreme Court judges on and federal courts all over the place, and they were worried what these judges would do. The Supreme Court had an opportunity twice to hear cases. They ruled against them twice. They rejected it twice. So the rule of law, I'm proud to say, held in our court system. But that did not matter to the lawless mob that overran the Capitol and tried to halt the certification of the election. While they were in the Capitol building, Trump sent out a tweet. He described the invaders as beautiful people, and he said that he loved them. Lincoln must have been rolling in his grave. The Lincoln Monument is 1.9 miles from the Capitol building, and on a clear night, you can see down. A clear day, you can see straight down. And Lincoln must have been, he never envisioned that day, I would suppose. Now, that was not the only incident of lawlessness from the right within the last year that's threatened our democratic republic. In October of 2020, the FBI arrested 13 men in Michigan for plotting to kidnap the governor and violently overthrow the government. The suspects were tied to a paramilitary group that called themselves the Wolverine Watchmen. They were motivated in large part by the strict COVID-19 restrictions imposed by the governor. Previous to that, in April and May, the militia, armed white men, invaded the Capitol in Lansing and made all their demands. Now, this, of course, that really was a trial run. What happened in Michigan was a trial run for what happened in Washington on January 6th. And Donald Trump did not speak out about what happened in Michigan. He encouraged them on the 6th, and we saw what happened. Now, the attack upon the rule of law, however, does not come only from the right. We all witnessed on television the lawlessness that followed the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis on May 25th of last year. All 4 officers involved in the killing of Mr. Floyd were fired the next day. And within 3 days, they were all charged with murder. Nevertheless, over a 3-day period from May 27th to May 29th, approximately 1,300 properties in Minneapolis were damaged by rioting and looting. 100 of the properties were totally destroyed. Protesters hurled rocks and bottles at police stations and police officers. On May 28th, the 3rd police precinct in Minneapolis was invaded, overrun, and set on fire. We later saw rioting in cities throughout our nation, all in the name of social justice. Here in Rochester, protesters outside the public safety building destroyed police cars and looted downtown stores. One of the stores that was that suffered the most was the Villa, a Black-owned business on East Main Street, directly across from the courthouse where I now speak. Videos of the looting showed hundreds of people running out of the Villa with armfuls of brand name sneakers and clothing. Even more disturbing was an incident that occurred in broad daylight on May 30th, when a husband and wife were assaulted by a mob outside a store they owned on Marshall Street, right near Monroe Avenue in the city of Rochester. It appeared that the couple had tried to board up their property and stop looters from breaking into their store or a jewelry store next door. It's a little unclear. The couple was beaten with wooden 2x4s and metal clubs. All of this was captured on video. Now, many of you right now may be saying, maybe yelling at your computer screens, yelling at me, that the overwhelming majority of the Black Lives Matter protests were entirely peaceful. And you would be correct. According to a report put out by a liberal nonprofit organization, there were 7,750 Black Lives Matter protests in the United States from May 26th to August 22nd of last year. And of those protests, 93% were peaceful. Now, even assuming that those numbers are correct, and there's room for debate on that, the 7% adds up. That means that there were 550 protests that turned violent. That is 6 violent protests a day. Now, to make matters worse, shortly after midnight on May 29th, Trump sent out a tweet that said, quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." When the looting starts, the shooting starts, is what our president said, as if the response to lawlessness is more lawlessness. And this is from the President of the United States, who was sworn to uphold the law. Lincoln, having already rolled over in his grave, was now probably trying to break out of his coffin and return to Washington to put an end to this lunacy. Now, we have to be careful. We cannot equate rioting and looting from the Black Lives Matter protests with what happened with the insurrection on January 6th, or what happened in Michigan. The insurrection was an attempt to essentially overthrow our government, to overturn an election that Joe Biden had won by a wide margin. In Michigan, they were trying to overthrow the state government, kidnap and kill a governor. The looting and destruction of property, although that's as bad as that is, pales in comparison to attempts to undermine our democracy by disregarding the will of the voters. And Trump, it's an injustice to the looters and rioters to put them in the same basket as Trump. Trump is the single most lawless public official in the history of our country. Now, I'm a judge, and I'm not supposed to engage in politics. If there's anyone on the Judicial Conduct Committee watching, I'm not giving my opinion, okay? I'm just stating facts. He is the single most, he has zero regard for the law. And as a matter of fact, his entire adult life has shown a disregard for the law. Those are facts, not my view. Those are just the facts. And he's on a whole nother plane of lawlessness. Now, the problems associated, problems arising from what Lincoln called the mobocratic spirit, are greatly enhanced by technology. And back in Lincoln's day, it was not easy to plan a rally. It's not like you could call somebody on the phone. You had to get on your horse and ride around town and let people know, hey, we're going to get together tomorrow night. And you were rather limited geographically in who you could invite. Today, with cell phones and Facebook and other social medias, Twitter, you can organize a massive rally quite easily and quickly. You don't even have to know the other people you're going to rally with. For instance, in December, a few weeks before the Capitol rally that ended in insurrection, Trump sent out a tweet that said, "Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, it will be wild." He was right about that. He later sent out another tweet saying, "January 6th, see you in D.C." Now, Trump he doesn't have any anymore, but at the time he had 80 million followers on Twitter, 80 million. So in a few seconds, with his thumb, he was able to summon thousands of people from all over the country to Washington for this rally, and they came. Now, what was Lincoln's solution to this problem? The answer, he said, was simple. He said, quote, "Let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher to his posterity swear by the blood of the revolution never to violate in the least particular the laws of the country and never to tolerate their violation in others." Although Lincoln urged a strict observance to all laws, he understood that there were what he called bad laws. But his solution was the bad laws, you should work to repeal them as, quote, as soon as possible. Until then, he said the bad laws should be religiously followed. Now, I'm not one to criticize Abe Lincoln, but I think he was wrong here. Some laws are wholly unjust. And to ask people to religiously observe such laws is to consign certain people to perpetual subjugation. Consider, for example, the Jim Crow laws that legalized segregation in the South after the Civil War. Those laws were not about to be changed anytime soon through the normal legislative process, lobbying, sending letters, so forth. And that's even if blacks were allowed to vote, which they weren't. What it took to change those laws over many years was disobedience of the laws, violation of the law, civil disobedience, an effective form of nonviolent protest. Now, we can't be too hard on Abe Lincoln because the idea of civil disobedience was first espoused in 1849 by Henry David Thoreau in an essay entitled On Civil Disobedience, 1849. Lincoln gave his speech, Lyceum address, back in 1838. Now, Thoreau had some very interesting thoughts on the rule of law. He pointed out that a law is not just merely because it reflects the will of the majority. So democracy, by definition, does not always result in fair and just laws. The majority may be persecuting the minority, which is what happened. Thoreau declared that if the governor is required to participate in injustice by obeying unjust laws, the people should break the laws even if they ended up in prison. Under a government which imprisons anybody unjustly, he asserted, the true place for a just man is also a prison. Thoreau's essay greatly affected Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Dr. King said that after reading Thoreau, he became convinced that non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. But both Gandhi and King added a nonviolent tenet to the concept of civil disobedience. Thoreau did not rule out the option of violent resistance to the government. He approved of John Brown's notorious raid on Harper's Ferry. But Gandhi and King felt that violence by protesters would undermine their cause. And both had great success in changing laws for the better, and I think they were right in that regard. Matter of fact, they encountered violence that was captured on television, at least Martin Luther King, and that only garnered sympathy for their cause. Now, I do think Lincoln, with the benefit of hindsight, I don't think he'd have any problem with Dr. King or his methods of effecting change through nonviolent disobedience of the law. Although the struggle for racial justice continues, the Jim Crow laws and racial segregation are gone, at least de jure, not de facto, thanks in large part to the civil disobedience orchestrated by Dr. King and his movement. I see that my time is running short, and I look forward to the question and answer session of the program. So I will close with a quote from the Lyceum address. Lincoln said, "Whenever the vicious portion of population shall be permitted to gather in bands of hundreds and thousands and burn churches and ravage and rob provision stores, throw printing presses into rivers, shoot editors, and hang and burn obnoxious persons at pleasure and with impunity, then depend on it. Our government cannot last." Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are today. And we need a modern day Lyceum address from somebody who could deliver the same message with the same credibility as Abraham Lincoln. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Justice Lindley, for that insight into the judiciary, such an important part of our checks and balances and so relevant to what's going on today. So I'd like to welcome our third and final panelist, and then we're going to take questions. So just a reminder to please submit your questions into the chat. And welcome Mr. Olajiwon McCadney.
Thank you so much, friends, for joining us this glorious evening. Just moving my things around. So I was asked to talk about where do we go from here? I was asked to talk about how do we hold each other accountable for the injustices that we witness? I was asked to talk about how can we be in community despite disagreement and dissent? And essentially, I'm going to be talking about how do we bring abolition to our homes? So to begin, friends, again, my name is Olajiwon McCadney, he, they series pronouns. First and foremost, there's been a series of flashbacks and flashpoints around the US in terms of how it exposed us to deep divides and reignited a national conversation about race, class, education, citizenship, sexuality, religion, spirituality, just to name a few. People differ in their opinions about the best approach to address these issues. And this is partly due to how we experience the world. For instance, if you are used to barriers to access, barriers to opportunity, as you attempt to actualize the proverbial American dream, you often internalize your circumstance and you believe that story you're experiencing is fact rather than fiction. Examples of these stories include, but are not limited to, lack of resources in metro and suburban areas, lack of access to adequate education, employment opportunities, the need for criminal justice reform due to overcriminalization and under-policing. While these are salient issues that need to be addressed, this is a limited focus because it ignores the plight of many where their identities intersect at those margins. The harsh reality is that we have a long and brutal history of injustice in this country. Think the removal of indigenous people from this land. Think Jim Crow policies. Think women's suffrage. Think reproductive rights. Think marriage rights. Think civil rights movement. Think about what is happening now. This harsh reality, despite policy changes, despite civil rights and feminism movements, has created a poisonous legacy in which our past remains with many of us, so that in turn, it creates doubt about our future for a more equitable and more just society. So why does this discontent linger? Well, we say things like, people should not be judged by the content of their character. People should be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. Yet we classify, tally, reply to, and assess one another based upon parts of their identity, like race and religion and sexuality and gender. This creates a blatant flaw between the belief that parts of a person's identity, like race, is irrelevant due to this post-racial world and this reflective practice that attends to how our identities actually show up in terms of being embraced and being affirmed. This in turn creates two realities. The goal is to try to not to get caught up in trying to prove whose reality is more real than the other. So how do we make progress based upon what we know? I ask you this because our history has damaged us. It has wounded us. It has crushed us. But when we tell the truth about that history, we can change things. That history is not just US history. Because if we create spaces where we resurrect the truth, we can change the global landscape. I repeat, when we create spaces that resurrect the truth, we can change the global landscape. Again, if we create spaces where we resurrect the truth, we can change the global landscape. That way, we can get to something that feels more like freedom, more like liberation, more like justice. We can shift this narrative so that we can achieve things that sort of unburden us, because we're resurrecting the hope that can also invigorate us. We must affirm that we are not to be held back by doubt, fear, or insecurity toward individual and collective freedom. Essentially, I'm asking us to lean on truth, because we were created with a purpose, and we have capacity as well as the ability to make a difference by creating a new narrative. We must now focus on ways for us to heal from the wounds of the past, to build reciprocal, respectful relationships across identities that value as well as honor each person's humanity. We must then build trusting intergenerational and intercultural community relationships that better reflect our common humanity. To cultivate this common humanity, we must understand that we are not in the same boat. As many of us weather the storm of injustice, we experience navigating the storm, and it's not the same. So realize we are not in the same boat, but we are in the same sea. Some boats are better equipped than others to navigate these shifts in the current, but we can embrace the fact that we're in the storm together. And if we have the ability to assist another ship, we have to be willing to offer support. And that support can be simply as, allyship. Allyship and advocacy are just a few ways we can build bridges to belonging rather than barriers. Allyship and advocacy are just a few ways that we can move the needle together, because we can be on the same page when it comes to recognizing our respected humanity and creating space for people to be their full, whole, authentic selves. So what does that look like? Well, first, we can channel the legacy of RBG. Remember, Ginsburg's legacy is a strong reminder how strategic use of the law can be influential in the way we attain transformative social change, both for women and other groups that were represented in her life's work. In her voice and leadership in the Supreme Court led to groundbreaking judgments on matters of discrimination in the workplace, women's rights, gender equality, reproductive rights. Her values were applied with uniform passion to all forms of discrimination and inequality, including those related to class and race and gender and other inequalities. She used her role as a justice of the Supreme Court to give visibility and address structural issues of discrimination and inequality as a matter of public debate. Broadly, her work as an individual of the court led to collective accountability regarding long-standing issues. This is a key piece, friends. How can you use your role, your position in society to impact the most vulnerable or the most susceptible to injustice, even if you too are experiencing injustice? Because it's not about you, it's about us. Moving from the inclusive me to the inclusive us. However, before we can do that, we must ask ourselves, do we have to take space from each other to get the perspective that we need? Am I willing to be in community with this person at all because I cannot embrace their perspective? The point is that we can let people live their lives, and we don't have to force our way or opinions onto them. This is because we are not better or worse than each other. We are literally each other. We must make room for every person so that they feel more validated, because that validation creates healing, and that healing can heal the world itself. But that healing takes consciousness. And why is that? Well, it's a conscious person that doesn't have to fight different ideas, but instead is curious about them. It is a compassionate person who understands another person's decisions are their own and they deserve to be loved anyway. It's a graceful person who knows not everyone's conscious or compassionate, yet they forgive those transgressions anyway, just as you're forgiven for your transgressions against others. This sense of forgiveness takes accountability. So what does holding one accountable look like? Well, first, accountability begins with you, friends. This must come from a shift from calling people out on maintaining injustice and calling them into the conversation. If you are set on holding someone accountable that you feel like it's your responsibility to make them atone for what they've done, you're forgetting that it's actually their responsibility to step up and be accountable. That's the key, friends. We must invite civility. We must invite grace to allow others to atone for their harm, even whether they caused it or were complicit to it. Their ability to acknowledge as well as own their harm gives them the agency to change their behavior. And by changing their conditioning so that not only that behavior is gone, but the ideology and the mindset that sustained that behavior is also gone. Sometimes they may not assume accountability for their behavior. However, if you truly want to be in relationship and be in community with others who are unable to take accountability, the part that is your responsibility is deciding how you're going to be in relationship and be in community moving forward. To be in relationship and community with others comes with the understanding that acts of injustice are not all the same, and each unique situation has a different set of strategies that would be most effective. To be in relationship and community comes with the understanding that as interrupters of injustice, we must avoid falling into the terrible pattern of standing against shame and judgment by shaming and judging others. To be in relationship and community comes with the understanding that we can't spend our energy on the person, but rather the behavior or how that behavioral shift benefits the community. To be in relationship and community comes with the understanding that we must nurture the people within our movement and outside of them. The people who like us are willing to learn, but are bound to make mistakes from time to time. And lastly, to be in relationship and to be in community comes the understanding that we must think deeply about how we hold each other accountable without hindering another's growth. Allow them the opportunity to pivot. Allow them the opportunity to understand. Allow them the opportunity to have the dissonance. Allow them the opportunity to engage in discomfort. Allow them the opportunity to build their own capacity so that they can have the opportunity to be a better version of them. And thank you, friends, and I'll bring it back.
Thank you so much. Olajiwon, I am grateful for your perspective and your thought leadership, and I'm happy that you are a new colleague of mine. So we're going to bring up the rest of our panelists, and I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Wicks, attorney and friend, and very involved in the Bar Association, who is going to be co-moderating our Q&A this evening. And we'll bring Rabbi Till and Justice Lindley back. And maybe, Jeff, if you want to give out that second code.
Yep. First of all, good evening to everybody and welcome. This program so far has been tremendous. All three of our panelists have been wonderful. For those of you that are attorneys for CLE credit, first of all, I'll remind you, in case you didn't get it the first time, that our first code that you need to put down on your sheets was 0000. The second code you need to enter on your form is 0001. That's 0000 and 0001 in order for you to get your CLE credits. Having said that, let's proceed with some questions and answers. Judge Lindley, if I may start with you. I was tremendously inspired by much of what you said, particularly your comments about the famous Lyceum speech by Abraham Lincoln, which was, by my count, if I've added correctly, 183 years ago in 1938, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You brought his comments and events of his time current with our time in ways that I don't have to repeat, and mostly in events of the last couple of weeks. But let me also inform our audience, as I'm sure you know, the Lincoln Lyceum speech was also cited recently during the impeachment proceedings by lead House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin. He was first working on a speech before the violence of January 6th. And then when he gave his opening remarks on on this past Tuesday, February 9th, this is what he said, and I quote, "And through the tears, I was working on a speech for the floor when we would all be together in joint session. And I wanted to focus on unity when we met in the House. I quoted Abraham Lincoln's famous 1838 Lyceum speech, where he said that if division and destruction ever come to America, it won't come from abroad. It will come from within," said Lincoln. And in that same speech, Lincoln passionately deplored mob violence. This was right after the murder of Elijah Lovejoy, the abolitionist newspaper editor. And Lincoln deplored mob violence, and he deplored mob rule. And he said it would lead to tyranny and despotism in America, unquote. So my question to you, Judge, is why is it that that speech and the themes therein ring so true today?
Lincoln foresaw a character like Donald Trump. He warned us in 1838. He was concerned that people, as I said previously, if the laws were being disregarded, there'd be an ambitious man who would come upon the scene who would take advantage of the mobocratic spirit. And he had referenced maybe Julius Caesar or other people from the past. But, and some historians think he was talking about Stephen Douglas, who he ran against for Senate. But really, he described, he didn't know him at the time, of course, but it was Donald Trump, somebody who has no regard for the rule of law, who would take advantage of people's passions for what they perceive to be justice, take advantage of them for his own personal benefit. And that's what we have seen. And that's what resulted on January 6th. Now, I did not realize that one of the House managers during the impeachment hearings had referenced the Lyceum address until Jeff pointed out to me earlier today, and I did then watch that. It was a very moving speech. But it is, Lincoln saw this happening. And if I think that his concerns should be our concerns. I mean, it became the supporters, Trump left voluntarily, but I was not entirely sure he would. Then what happens if he mobilizes the military? So this should be a wake-up call. We cannot take for granted our system of government and self-rule in the face of somebody like Donald Trump, who has no regard for the rule of law, and his supporters who have no regard for the rule of law and who are not, have no problems engaging in violence. So it took a while, but what Lincoln predicted came true earlier this year.
Yeah, I wanted to throw out a question really both for the rabbi and for Olajiwon. The other panelists, Olajiwon, asked me if we should call you Mr. McCadney. And I said, I've never heard him called that, but maybe he wants that. No. Okay, good. You'd let us know. So you both brought up in your own language, and that is one of the beautiful things I think about all three of the presentations. Like literally in our different sectors, in our different home courts, we use different language, but you are talking about similar themes. And so, Rabbi, you gave, you were talking about the House of Hillel and Shammai, and you gave several examples of ways, and I wrote them down real quickly, but, ways that we shouldn't damage and attack people when we disagree with them, that we should, check our motivation. We should admit when we're wrong. And then Olajiwon, you also in your own words, talked about, not walking away, I'm paraphrasing, and letting, other voices be heard. So, one of the things that Zoom brought us is the long, lengthy chat, right? And so what you see in a lot of chats is somebody will hear like one sentence that a speaker says, and they right away they're, and some people will hang up. And this, I think, is really just a microcosm of what's happening in the real world. We don't want to listen to each other, or we hear a half a sentence and it doesn't sound good. So my question for you two is, what are really like some takeaways? Like, where do you start? This is a lot to do to change ourselves from being so polarized to coming together. Where do we begin? What's maybe a first step? Whichever wants to go. Olajiwon, you want to take that first, or?
Yeah, I think the first step is, one, just owning what you don't know, and that's okay. I say this a lot when I do trainings and workshops on our campus, is that everyone has this notion of being hard on themselves, and because this stuff is hard. But sometimes you have to embrace a sense of softness when you're doing this work. Because like you think about clay, you can't do anything with clay once it's hard. But once it's soft, it's moldable. So being moldable, you have to be in tune and being open to what you don't know. And then the goal is just to build capacity. And when I say build capacity, is that, we're all coming in here with different levels of expertise and knowledge and ways of knowing and ways of being. We all have the capacity to be better versions of ourselves. And we have a willingness to invite that flexibility for us to pivot mentally, emotionally when we do this work. I know I saw in the chat, I'm looking at a comment that someone didn't understand what I was trying to relay, and they wanted to know whether or not is it everyone's responsibility to help others. And no. It's not everyone's responsibility to help others, but it is everyone's responsibility to be in community with others. We have to ask each other what that help looks like. And the help may not be spiritual, may not be financial, but the help can look like us just knowing the truth. And the reality is that a lot of the knowledge that we are indoctrined through is sort of skewed. how do we sort of take the layers of knowledge that are missing and fill in those gaps to get a true picture of what our history has done that caused us to still keep repeating it? And I'll end there and refer to Rabbi.
So it's such a good question, right? And it's such a difficult question. We have a similar teaching that says, alti fros minhat tzibor, don't separate yourself from the community. But with full candor, right, there are some people we don't also want to sit with, where compromise doesn't look feasible, where any of the things that we have put up seem like an impossibility, that we are not only diametrically opposed, or our core values feel threatened, but we are dehumanized, or our personal safety is at risk, or our communal safety is at risk, right? In preparation for today, I was talking to a colleague who served in Charlottesville, who said, unequivocally, I'm not going to sit down with a neo-Nazi and see if we can find compromise. I'm not going to look, for that moment. She said, what I did find, amazingly, were allies with whom I would have never come in contact, because they too were horrified and terrified by what happened. And though, this is in a religious setting, right? And though, she said to me, and though religiously, and in terms of some other issues, right, we might be miles apart on this issue at this moment, we were able to come together, they were able to come, and we were able to come to jointly address the issue at hand. Right, and I think that's in part what Hillel and Shammai were talking about, right? That terrible day on the 9th of Adar, when thousands were killed because of disagreement about the truth, and even that is a loaded word, right? The truth, we have different understandings about truth with a capital T or a lower T versus law, right? Different in terms of how we live in community, but how we understand truth, that is, truth and belief, the gray between those is very difficult, right? But we ought to be looking for, in my estimation, right, and in my tradition's estimation, we ought to be looking for those people, perhaps with whom we might disagree on other matters, but find space and place to come together over the matters where we can, right? It's not going to be a moment where we all agree and it's rainbows and flowers and all is well in the world, right? We look for those places where we can, as Olajiwon said, where we can remain in community, in earnest, right, and with integrity, and to do the work around the issues that need to continue to be done, and how we get along day to day. In business, in worship, in community repair, in any number of places, can help shape that, in terms of our, broader system of law and what is needed, right? When we talked about coming together for this, we talked about, from a house of worship point of view or from a college point of view, right? What we can do in our microcosms, sits in concentric circles, perhaps with what Justice Lindley does, right? They're not at odds with one another. How we get along, day to day, might land us in front of, Justice Lindley or not, right?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rabbi Till, thank you, Olajiwon. I have a question. I think, now that I think of it, both for Olajiwon and Judge Lindley. As Judge Lindley knows, we as lawyers in the community have standards of conduct that we must live by, and they're called the New York State Rules of Conduct. If we violate them, we can get in trouble. Somebody can report us to what's called the Grievance Committee. But there's another set of rules that are less known even to lawyers, called the Standards of Civility. And they're not well published and they're not well known, but they're important, and it governs not just our misconduct as the rules of conduct do it, but it governs how we act towards each other. And it's that I want to address with both of you. I want to read a couple of sections for it. Again, this is called the Standards of Civility. The most important part of which, and I quote, lawyers can disagree without being disagreeable. lawyers should act in a civil manner, regardless of the ill feelings that their clients might have towards others. And it goes on like that. And the point being that in both Judge Lindley's speech and Olajiwon's speech, there were parts that addressed the issue of civility. And I think that especially over the past 4 years, our country has lost that sense of civility. And I guess I want to know from both of you your thoughts as to, number one, am I right? Have we lost a sense of civility towards each other? And number two, how do we get it back?
I'll defer to Olajiwon first.
Olajiwon?
Sorry, I was writing the question down. Have we lost civility? Yeah, I am torn because I would say it depends on the community. I'd say collectively, as we become in sync with one another, yes. I don't actually, to be honest, and asking me from like my lens and my lived experience, I don't think we ever had civility. I think we had notions of togetherness. We've had notions of equity or equality, but civility, I think even just like the notion of the civil rights movement, it wasn't even civil. So I think, but how do we get back? One, just acknowledge and own the fact that we're not there, first and foremost, and then figure out what are the ways that we can reconcile. And I think so I do restorative justice work. And one of the things of restorative justice is not only are you addressing the harms, you are addressing the causes of the harms. And what often happens is that there are many types of harm. We often fixate on the communal and relation harm, like the climate, how I'm experiencing the world now. And that relational and communal harm then creates emotional harm. It's the energy that creates and sustains our allegiance to trauma and injustice. And we lose sight of the historical and the structural harm that sort of sustains the other types of harm. So I think we have to work in tandem to look at all these sort of buckets of harm and try to reconcile them at the same time, rather than focusing on what we currently perceive as what's unjust.
Good. Thank you very much. Judge?
I think we live in highly uncivil times. We have lost the ability to disagree in a respectful manner in a large part in our country. You turn on cable television, people who disagree with you, would disagree with certain people, are deemed enemies. And caustic language. We are all Americans. We're all humans. And we have, I think, we have descended into vitriol on both sides. Now, in the court system, nothing bothers me more in the court system than when lawyers come in and are disrespectful to opposing counsel. We should be an oasis from that. From the Donald Trump, look, Donald Trump, I've never seen anybody. When he ran a Republican primary, he would just criticize everybody in like childlike fashion. He did it, I mean, he's taken it to another level. You cannot disagree with Donald Trump without him coming back at you with some childlike insult. That was never, if you watch the debates between, the first televised debates, I believe, were Nixon-Kennedy in '60. Watch those debates and compare them to what we saw with Trump debating people. Infantile insults. I mean, it's a disgrace what our political discourse has come to. Now, in the courtroom, that does happen every now and then. I try to set the tone. The tone comes from the bench. we can disagree respectfully. Now, we're not in the courtroom to make friends, okay? There's important issues. You're representing your client. A lot is at stake. Somebody's life is at stake. Somebody's liberty, somebody's property. So we're not there to be friendly and play patty cake. But you can advocate vigorously in a respectful manner. And that's what's missing from our political discourse. And it's terribly disappointing.
So, yes, thank you. We're running short on time, but I do have a question that maybe brings together a few that have come in through the chat that we can end with for all the panelists. And also just one brief point on the civility question. When we're measuring anti-Semitism and various forms of hate, we look at a number of factors. And one of the things that we look at is whether it's okay to say something if you're just with a friend that's anti-Semitic, for example, or if you're in a public space to say that, or if people in government are saying it. So in other words, the more public the expressions of hate and dislike are, the less civility. So it is a time where our incivility is very public, and I think that sort of came out of what everybody was saying. But so this one question, and is really that, you know, we do tend to get siloed in our different sectors at work with our own language and in our own circles of people. So is there a way that you suggest what we can do to sort of move out of those silos? And Jeff, did you have anything to add to that as a final question?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Well, we're about out of time.
Yeah, we're about out of time. So maybe just a closing comment from everybody.
I want to thank everybody. The presenters were incredibly well prepared. We are at the 7:30 mark. So I want to, first of all, thank Hava. It's been a pleasure working with you in organizing this. I want to thank our team, as you mentioned, Joe Paperno, Kevin Ryan, Karen Elam, and our three panelists. Thank you so much for your excellent presentations. And I hope that we can do this again. So good night to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us.